Most men at the auction bought what they could break. But Ewan Gray wasn't most men, and his choice that day would spark a story no one expected. The summer heat of 1883 clung heavy over Dust Creek, a frontier town where desperation sold cheaper than whiskey. Men gathered in the alley behind the saloon, their laughter sharp, cruel, cutting through the still air. A makeshift stage of crates and splintered boards held what was left of the day's merchandise. Blood and spit stained the dirt below. Most of the crowd had already made their choices, dragging away women like cattle at the end of a long market day. But one figure still remained. She stood barely upright, shackled to a post, her dress torn and hanging wrong, her ribs held tight as if they might crack apart at any moment. Bruises painted her face in purples and blacks, her lips split, her hair tangled and matted from days of neglect. She didn't cry anymore. That part of her had been beaten out long before the bidding began. What was left was silence, an empty stare fixed on the ground, as if the earth itself was the only witness she could still trust. The auctioneer barked one last call, his voice dripping with mockery. "Damaged goods, $5 and 2 bits." The crowd jeered, turning away, dismissing her as broken. And that was when a shadow cut through the haze of dust and heat. Ewan Gray, a solitary rancher known only for his silence and the distance he kept from town, stepped forward. His eyes didn't linger on her torn dress or bruises. He saw something else, something that hadn't been taken from her yet. He dropped a small bundle of silver into the auctioneer's palm. The crowd scoffed, but Ewan didn't care. When the chain at her wrist fell loose, she flinched but stayed standing. For the first time in months, maybe years, someone had chosen her. Not as property, but as a person worth saving. The chain clattered to the dirt. For a moment, the only sound was the lazy creak of the saloon door behind them and the scuff of boots dispersing into the street. The woman swayed, still gripping her ribs, half expecting another shove, another cruel hand to yank her down. But none came. Instead, a coat, rough canvas smelling of leather and smoke, draped over her shoulders. She startled, almost pulling away, until she saw the man's hand retreat. Ewan Gray didn't speak. He simply stood there, the brim of his hat shadowing eyes that gave nothing away. His presence was steady, solid, like the ridges outside town that had stood against every storm. He didn't stare at her wounds. He didn't leer. He just waited, patient as stone. "Come on," he said at last, his voice even, almost flat. Her bare feet touched the ground as she stepped off the crate. Gravel bit into her skin, but she didn't falter. No one in the crowd stopped them. A few men muttered crude remarks, but no one dared challenge the rancher's silence. They crossed through Dust Creek together, an odd pair. The broken woman clutching his coat around her body, the solitary rancher whose name was usually spoken in whispers. At the edge of town, his horse waited. He helped her mount, not by lifting her like baggage, but by offering his hand. She gripped it, trembling, and pulled herself into the saddle. He mounted behind her, guiding the reins with loose, careful hands. The horse set into motion, hooves kicking up little clouds of dust that drifted like ghosts behind them. For an hour they rode west, neither speaking. The sun bore down mercilessly, the wind dry as bone. Once her body slumped and she nearly slipped, but she caught herself before he reached out. Ewan didn't correct her, didn't push her to sit straighter. He just slowed the horse, letting her lean into the rhythm until the land began to change. The bustle of town falling away to silence, the horizon stretching wide, broken only by cedar brush and red rock. At last, a cabin appeared, weather-worn but standing firm against the wild. Smokehouse to one side, a small corral to the other, fences leaning but still holding. It wasn't much, but compared to the crate she had stood on, chained and mocked, it was a kingdom. Ewan dismounted first and reached up. This time she let him help her down. Her legs wobbled, but she stood. He pushed the door open, waiting as if the threshold was hers to choose. Inside, the air was cooler, shaded by rough-hewn logs. A cot sat against the wall, blankets folded neat. A stone hearth weighted with wood stacked ready. The smell was of sweat, leather, and dust, but underneath it lingered something else. Order. A life stripped bare but not ruined. He poured her a tin cup of water and set it on the table. Then, without a word, he stepped back outside to unsaddle the horse. The woman, still clutching the coat around her, drank. The water was bitter cold from the well, running down her throat like mercy. When he returned, she hadn't moved from the chair. Her eyes followed him, wary but less wild than before. That night she lay on the cot, curled tight beneath a thin wool blanket. Her ribs screamed every time she shifted. Every creak of the cabin made her flinch. But there were no chains, no voices jeering in the dark. Across the room, Ewan sat by the hearth, the firelight throwing hard lines across his face. Later, he stretched out on the floor by the door, one hand resting loosely across his chest, his breath steady. He didn't offer words. He didn't ask for hers. The silence wasn't safe, not yet. But it wasn't dangerous either. Morning came slow, with pale light slipping through the single window. She stirred, blinking at the empty space where chains should have been. No one had locked her in. Her bare feet touched the floorboards, testing weight that trembled but held. At the basin sat clean water and soap. Her throat caught at the sight of it. She touched the cloth, half in disbelief. Boot steps crunched outside. She stiffened, but when the door opened, Ewan only gave her a nod and set a steaming mug on the table. Coffee, bitter and hot. She wrapped her hands around it, burning her tongue on the first sip, but feeling warmth spread through her chest anyway. Her voice, when it came, rasped and uncertain. "You live here alone?" "Yeah," he said, never looking up. "Better than town." She wanted to ask more. Wanted to ask why he had paid silver for a woman the crowd mocked as ruined. Why he hadn't touched her. Why he didn't even ask her name. But the words tangled in her throat. Instead, she asked the only question she could manage. "Why'd you do it?" Ewan paused, stirred the pot simmering over the fire. His face turned toward her, hard but not cruel. "Seemed wrong, leaving you up there like that." He left it there. No speeches, no explanations. Just truth, blunt as a hammer. For the first time in longer than she could remember, the woman felt her shoulders ease. She still held his coat closed over her chest, still guarded. But something inside her shifted. She wasn't safe, not yet. But she wasn't disposable anymore either. That night, as the fire crackled low and coyotes howled in the distance, she drifted into a shallow sleep. Her body hurt. Her memories burned like fresh scars. But when she woke to the sound of breathing steady across the room, she realized something had changed. She wasn't alone. And friends, that's just the beginning of Clara's journey. From the dirt of Dust Creek to the quiet safety of a lonely ranch where the fight for dignity and survival was only starting. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share so more people can follow along with these Wild West tales of hope, justice, and redemption. She woke to the smell of wood smoke and coffee. The morning light spilled pale across the floorboards, cutting sharp lines into the cabin's silence. For a moment, she didn't move, half afraid the night had been a dream, half bracing for the bark of an order, the slap of a hand, the rattle of a chain. But none came. Only the steady scrape of metal against wood as Ewan whittled something by the hearth. Her ribs throbbed when she sat up, but she managed, clutching the blanket to her chest. He didn't turn immediately. He gave her time. When his eyes did flick toward her, they didn't linger where the blanket slipped down her shoulder. They looked straight into hers, and then, just as simply, he nodded, as if acknowledging that she was awake was all that needed saying. The silence between them was strange, heavy at first, but not cruel. She sipped from the mug he'd left at her bedside, bitter coffee that scalded her tongue but settled her shaking hands. For the first time in months, maybe years, she realized no one was waiting for her to beg. No one was circling to see how little it would take to break her. Later that day, she ventured outside. The air was sharp with the scent of cedar and earth. The barn leaned tired against the wind, but it stood. Chickens scratched at the dirt near the fence. It wasn't much, this place, but it breathed. It had roots. She caught herself standing still, letting the quiet seep in, and for once it didn't feel like punishment. Ewan noticed her watching. He paused at the corral, Rope looped over his shoulder and spoke as if the words cost him something. You ever worked with horses? She shook her head. You'll learn. That was all. No command, no expectation. Just the plain belief that she could. And when he led the mare out, she held the gate steady with trembling arms, heart hammering as the animal's breath steamed in the cool morning. The horse shifted, wary, but calmed under his hand. She recognized it. His patience, the way he didn't force, didn't rush. It mirrored the way he treated her. Careful, watchful, never pushing closer than she allowed. By the third day, she swept out the cabin on her own, her body sore but stronger with every motion. The broom rasped across the wood, stirring dust that glowed in the shaft of afternoon sun. Ewan returned from the ridge with his shirt damp in patches, his stride marked by a slight limp she hadn't noticed before. He said nothing about it, but when he lowered himself into the chair by the hearth, the wince in his jaw told her more than he meant to. She found herself speaking before she thought better of it. Your leg? What happened? His knife paused mid-sharpen. Bullet. War. His voice carried no self-pity, only fact. Didn't go deep, left me crooked. Her eyes lingered on the set of his shoulders, the calloused bend of his fingers. Worn, scarred, but still building, still holding. You're young for a man who looks so old, she said quietly. For the first time, a sound slipped from him. Half a laugh, dry as dust. Guess I earned it. So have I, she whispered, and the silence between them changed shape. It softened, not into comfort exactly, but into something human, something shared. Nights remained hard. She still woke at every sound, every creak of timber, every gust against the shutters. But she no longer woke to chains. Instead, the steady rhythm of his breathing filled the room. He never crossed the space to her cot. He never reached out in the dark. That restraint was more disarming than any kindness she had known. It gave her back something she thought was lost. Her choice. One evening, when the sky cracked open with rain, she sat by the window, wrapped in a patched blanket. The water ticked against the tin roof, and she asked, without looking at him, Do you have family? Had a brother, he said after a pause. Ethan, younger. Died in the war while I was out scouting. She looked at him, eyes soft. I'm sorry. He nodded once. Long time ago. His hands stilled on the leather strap he'd been mending. Still carry it, though. Her throat tightened. I carry things too, she said, voice steady, though her fingers clenched in the wool. For a long moment they sat like that, the storm whispering around the cabin, both of them heavy with ghosts. But for the first time, those ghosts felt less suffocating. Shared, they lost some of their weight. Days turned into weeks. She learned the rhythm of the place, the split of firewood, the mending of saddles, the gathering of eggs. None of it asked for repayment. None of it was demanded. She did it because it anchored her, because it gave shape to hours that had once bled together in terror. Slowly, her body changed. Bruises faded from purple to yellow, then to faint shadows. The limp in her step eased. When she looked in the cracked mirror above the basin, she almost recognized herself again. Ewan never asked her past, never pressed for names or details. He gave her silence, space wide enough to breathe. And in that space, trust took root, fragile but alive. One evening she found herself standing by the fire, watching him sharpen his blade. Words tumbled out before she could stop them. If someone came looking for me, what would you do? He didn't blink. You belong to nobody. That's not what I asked. If they came to hurt you, he said, voice calm as iron, they wouldn't leave walking. Her stomach twisted, not in fear but in a strange relief. She swallowed hard, her lips pressing tight. Then why do I still feel like I owe you something I can't repay? He looked away toward the dark hills beyond the window. Maybe don't think of it like debt. Maybe just stay human. Her breath caught. For weeks she had survived like an object, a body passed between hands. To be told she was more, that she still was, left her raw, trembling. And for the first time, she let herself believe it. That night, when she curled beneath the blanket, she didn't face the wall. Her eyes stayed open in the glow of the fire, fixed on the figure across the room. He lay with his back against the logs, his chest rising slow, steady. And as sleep came, she realized she no longer feared the silence. It no longer swallowed her. It held her. The days had begun to blend into rhythm. Firewood stacked, coffee boiled, saddles mended, fences checked. For the first time in months, maybe years, she knew what it meant to wake without dread tightening her throat. Yet peace on the frontier was never permanent. It held like thin ice, solid until the wrong weight pressed down. She was braiding her hair one cool morning when the knock came. Sharp, too certain to be friendly. Her breath froze. Ewan was outside at the barn. She tightened her grip on the doorframe before opening it a crack. A man stood there, dust settling on his coat, a rifle strapped across his back. Greasy hair slicked against his temples, a mustache curling like it had been drawn in haste. His smile was all wrong. "You Jonas's woman?" he asked, glancing past her shoulder as if he owned the right to look inside. Her heart stuttered. "Who's asking?" "Name's Hatch. Bounty rider." He leaned against the post with a lazy ease that set her stomach turning. "Heard talk in Dust Creek. Said a girl matching your description slipped off that auction block. Some ledger back east still got you marked as property. Looks to me like you fit." The air in the doorway thickened. She felt the blood drain from her hands. Hatch studied her, his grin sour. "Don't worry, ain't here to drag you off. Just wanted to see if the rumors were true, that Gray paid silver and then didn't collect what was owed." He tilted his head, mocking. "Not many men like that. Most take what they buy, unless maybe you gave it up free." Her cheeks burned, shame threatening to choke her. Before she could find her voice, boot steps crunched across the yard. Hatch straightened as Ewan approached, silent but steady, eyes hard as flint. "Get off my land," Ewan said flatly. Hatch chuckled. "Now don't go barking, Gray. I was just checking in. Folks said you were playing house with broken stock. Thought maybe I'd see it for myself." "She's not yours," Ewan answered, tone cold as iron. "Didn't say she was." Hatch's smile sharpened. "Just thought it a waste, feeding what can't be fixed. But hell, your coin." Ewan didn't blink. "I'll say it once more. Leave." The two men locked eyes. Then Hatch spat into the dirt, tipped his hat mockingly, and walked off down the trail, whistling low. She stayed rooted by the doorway, shaking. Ewan lingered beside her until Hatch vanished over the rise. Only then did he turn. His gaze softened just enough to cut through her trembling. "You all right?" She swallowed hard. "He's not wrong about what people think." Her voice cracked. "They see me as—" She couldn't finish. Ewan's voice broke through, steady. "You are not what was done to you." She turned her face away, tears threatening. "But they'll never let me be anything else." "Then we make a life where their voices can't reach," he said. The words hit deeper than she expected. A life. The idea of it felt fragile, impossible. And yet, standing in the doorway with him, it was the first time she believed it might be true. But the past never released its grip so easily. Days later, dust rose on the horizon. 4 riders crested the ridge, Hatch among them. Rifles slung, faces hard. The kind of men who rode with claims and left with blood. Ewan stepped forward before they even spoke, his hand loose near his side, not yet on his weapon but close enough. "Told you she was trouble," Hatch called, reining in his horse. "Ledger says she's marked. Belongs to a man back east who paid for her fare. You know how it works, Gray. Paper's paper." "She's not paper," Ewan answered, his voice flat. One of the men shifted uneasily, glancing at Clara standing behind him. "We came peaceful, like Hatch said, but peaceful's got limits." Ewan's jaw tightened. "You ride off, or you don't ride at all." The weight of the words hung heavy in the dry air. Clara felt something surge inside her. Terror, yes, but also a sudden searing clarity. She stepped out from behind him. "I'm not going with you," she said, voice shaking but firm. "I don't care what your books say. I don't belong to anyone." Hatch smirked. Sweet thing, the law don't ask your say. Paper says you're spoken for. Clara reached into Ewan's coat pocket with trembling fingers and pulled free the small stub of a receipt. Creased, silver-inked paper, the only trace of the transaction that freed her. She held it up high. This is the only paper that counts, she said, voice gaining strength. He paid, no one else did. Whatever ledger you've got, it ends with this. The other writers shifted, uncertain. One frowned. She's right. Auction closed, money changed hands. That makes it clean. Hatch scowled. Don't matter. Damaged stock's still stock. It matters, Ewan cut in, stepping closer. You said you came peaceful. Now go while you can. Silence stretched. Finally, one of the men tugged at Hatch's reins. Ain't worth dying over. Hatch's mouth twisted. He spat into the dirt once more, glaring between them. Suit yourself. Then he wheeled his horse, the others following. Dust swallowed them as they rode off. Clara's chest heaved, her pulse wild. Ewan's hand brushed hers lightly. You all right? She nodded, though her legs trembled. I didn't want to hide, she whispered. You didn't. His voice was steady, grounding her. That night, she sat at the table staring at her scarred hands. The storm had passed, but the weight of it lingered. Ewan set a cup of coffee in front of her without a word. She wrapped her fingers around it, burning her palms just to feel steady. After a long silence, she spoke. Do you ever think I'm a burden? He met her eyes. Number you didn't ask to be put on that block. You didn't choose what was done to you. But you chose to stay. His gaze softened. That means something to me? Her throat tightened. She didn't know if she had the words to answer, so she held the cup tighter, letting the heat anchor her. Across the table, his presence filled the silence. Not demanding, not taking, just steady. For the first time, she realized she wasn't surviving anymore. She was standing, and she wasn't standing alone. The riders were gone, swallowed by the dust of the open plains. But the echo of their words lingered long into the night. Clara sat hunched at the table, her fingers wrapped tight around a tin cup of coffee, trembling more from memory than from cold. Ewan's presence across from her was steady, silent, a wall against the weight pressing down on her chest. You chose to stay, he'd told her. And somehow, that sentence stayed burning inside her like a coal, small but alive. Days slipped into weeks. The bruises on her skin faded until only faint shadows remained. Her limp eased. Her voice, once hoarse from disuse and fear, began to carry clearer notes. She no longer woke clutching the blanket to her chest. Sometimes she woke to the rhythm of his breathing, the fire's glow, and realized her heart wasn't pounding in terror anymore. It was steady. Ewan never asked for what wasn't freely given. That was the strangest part, the part that unsettled her even as it soothed her. When he mended fence lines, she walked beside him, carrying nails, holding posts. When he split wood, she gathered kindling, her hands raw but proud. Little by little, the silence between them shifted from wary distance to something almost like home. One evening, as the sun dipped low and set the horizon aflame, she stood near the corral watching him work. His shirt clung with sweat, his limp more visible at the end of the day. She found herself walking toward him without thinking, her hand brushing his arm as if testing the space. He didn't flinch, didn't claim more. He only turned, his eyes steady on hers. Do you think I'm worth anything? She whispered. You're not a thing, he said. You're someone. The words broke something open inside her. She leaned against him, trembling, not from fear, but from the terrifying relief of being seen. That night, she didn't sleep across the room. She lay beside the fire near where he rested, their hands inches apart until his fingers found hers. Rough, calloused, but warm. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. For the first time, she fell asleep without turning toward the wall. Seasons shifted. By spring, the cabin looked different. Curtains at the windows. Firewood stacked high. 2 mugs on the table instead of 1. Clara's belly rounded beneath her dress, life quickening inside her, proof that brokenness had given way to something fierce, something enduring. When Ewan returned from town one evening with a silver band in his hand, His words were simple. You've been mine since the day you stepped off that block, but I'd like to make it true in front of everyone. She didn't cry then. She only slipped the ring onto her finger, and when they rode into Dust Creek together a week later, no one whispered. No one laughed. They stood in silence as vows were spoken, plain and heavy with truth. Back on the porch that night, she leaned against him, his hand resting over the curve of her stomach, the land stretching quiet and endless around them. It wasn't survival anymore. It was home. It was permanence. And friends, if this story of Clara and Ewan moved you, if it made you feel the weight of pain, the strength of dignity, and the power of a second chance, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. These Wild West tales live on because of you, and there are many more stories waiting to be told.